Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I know we may have some others join us here in just a moment. Dr. Robertson is with us also. He's kind of on the road right now, so we don't want him to have an accident or anything. So he may chime in here every now and then, so just keep that in mind. But we're so excited to have Kristen Masuri here with us from the Texas Tech Writing Center, and she's just been a wealth of information, especially when I was working on my doctorate. I was just so pleased to know that when I could go over there, I could get a lot of things understood as far as how I was doing my literature review, all kinds of different things of that aspect. I even took advantage of their boot camp that they had also, and I know they were doing some of that even online. So she'll talk about all of that, so I'll let her take over. I am recording this, so if any of you have to drop off or something happens with your connection, don't worry, we'll make sure and get this video out to everybody. Dr. Alexander will be joining us as well just a little bit later. She kind of had another meeting just before this one. So Kristen, take it away.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. I always appreciate hearing how people have used these resources. It's always wonderful to hear, so thank you for that. So today I have two purposes. First, I'm going to talk a bit about what the Graduate Writing Center does, and then I'll also share some advice for productive writing practices. So this is one of the most common issues that we see in the Writing Center, just that people need to learn to write productively and to develop practices that are sustainable. So that's something that is valuable for people in all disciplines, whether you go into a career in academia or industry or any sector of the economy. It's really important to learn to manage your time and write productively. So I will first talk about our Grad Writing Center resources, take any questions you might have there, and I'll talk a little bit about productive writing. So I'll start out by saying, because of the pandemic, for this semester, we have online services only. So everything we do is always available online as well as face-to-face, even in non-pandemic times. But right now, we're only meeting with people online so that we can maintain social distancing. So I'd like to talk a little bit about our services. Our primary service is one-to-one writing consultations. So that is an opportunity for our students to meet with experienced writing consultants. We have graduate and professional consultants who can talk about anything that you might be writing at any step of the writing process. So we do like to talk about things like literature reviews or theses and dissertations. We can talk about job documents when you're going on the job market, or if you're applying for a scholarship or a fellowship or a grant. But anything that you're writing, we can provide feedback. So that is something that I recommend students take advantage of throughout their graduate career. You don't even need to have anything written to meet with a writing consultant. Even if you just get an assignment, or if you are just starting out on something, say you are just starting to write a cover letter for a scholarship opportunity or for a job, you can come in and plan it with a writing consultant. You can go over something that you've already drafted. We even talk about grammar and punctuation. So that is really the most important service that we have. So the research in my field of writing studies shows that when you engage with your writing, when you have those conversations, that's really the way that you become a stronger writer. And that's really the mission of the Graduate Writing Center, is to help students develop their writing and research skills. So we hope that you'll write a really strong literature review or a really strong dissertation, but our primary goal is really to help you develop those skills so that you have that skill set when you move into your career and out into the world. So again, that's our primary resource. That's really what we do most of the time. But then we have a variety of other resources as well. So I mentioned that productive writing is something that we talk about a lot, something that we really try to support for graduate students. And so we offer thesis and dissertation boot camps and writing groups for those purposes. A thesis and dissertation boot camp is a 4-day event that we hold every semester. Our next will be in May intersession. It's 3 hours per day, and you spend a little bit of time in small groups talking about goals that you're setting, talking about issues you may be encountering, asking questions, and then the rest of that time is dedicated to writing. And then we also have campus resources giving presentations. But the boot camp is really a time to develop a small community of writers to learn from one another and talk about your writing. and then get a lot of writing done in a short amount of time. So it's sort of the kickstart to the semester. And then the writing groups will carry you throughout the rest of that semester. So those are weekly meetings that are 3 hours long. It's about 15 to 30 minutes to start each meeting with, again, some discussion, talking about topics related to productive writing and navigating graduate school. And then the rest of that time is dedicated to writing. So it serves multiple purposes in that it creates time and space for writing that's protected, because we all know that once you get busy with different obligations that you may have, often writing is the thing that gets pushed off to the side and delayed. And so those are protected times and spaces for writing. It also gives you a community of other writers. So especially when you're writing a long project like a thesis or a dissertation, sometimes that can be quite isolating. And if any of you are in the dissertation process right now, you may be experiencing that, especially during the pandemic. And so this provides you with a community of colleagues who you can bounce ideas off of and get advice from. And that's something that's been really successful for a lot of people in propelling them through that dissertation process. So again, consultations, use any time. Boot camp once a semester, usually once you are already starting at least your dissertation proposal. And then the writing groups are for when you have that dissertation proposal, or especially the dissertation itself, kind of keep you on track and keep you moving through the semester. And then our final service is writing workshops. And we hold writing workshops just about every 2 weeks on different topics. The next one is going to be held next week on March 16th, 4 to 5 p.m. And it will be about writing style and specifically connecting ideas and how to do that effectively in your writing. But these cover a variety of topics. If you are interested in looking at the list of this semester's workshop, you can visit our website there at the bottom of the page. That's also where you'll go to schedule an appointment. So that is an overview of all that we offer in the Graduate Writing Center. Are there any questions or anything I can show you? If we have time at the end, I can also kind of help you see the online interface and show you what that looks like. But for now, are there any questions about these services or how we can help you become a stronger writer?
Did you say the dates for the May one?
I don't have the dates yet. It's always during intersession. So if you look up the dates for May intersession,
Okay.
but we are still in the very early process, part of that process. Yeah, sorry, I don't have specific dates.
That's okay, I can look it up.
Okay, sounds good. It's always a Monday through a Thursday. And I will mention, we work really hard to have all of our services available, at least in part in the evenings, recognizing that many people work jobs during the day and aren't available. So we always have evening writing consultations. We always have writing groups that meet at night. We always have a few workshops that are in the evening, and then our spring and fall boot camps are in the evening, and then the summer boot camp in May is during the afternoon to accommodate students who prefer that time, especially because a lot have childcare during the day, and so they use that time to write. So we try to accommodate different schedules. We try to make everything available face-to-face in normal times, but everything will always be available online for distance students. Any other questions I can answer? See, we have something in the chat. Boot camp is face-to-face and online typically. This past year, we've been doing online only, and that's been really successful. I think in May will likely be still online only. And so that is, I haven't made a final decision on that because the situation is changing so rapidly. But most likely in May will be online only.
And Kristen, that's a good thing for most of these students because most of them are, this is a doctoral program that's online. So some of them are not even in the States. So,
okay, yes.
So that helps out quite a bit.
Good. And like I mentioned, even in non-pandemic times, all of our services are always available online. So if you ever have to, if you're ever wondering if something is available online from the Writing Center, it is.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? I've had internet trouble. So
yes, I can.
Thank you for answering my question.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And I love telling distance students that, because I think often there's an assumption that if something's face-to-face, it's not available to distance students. So I do like to point out that it always is. Any other questions for now? Okay. So I'll talk a little bit now about some productive writing tips. And if we want to return and talk a little bit about how you can use these strategically to, write productively, how you can incorporate the Writing Center into your writing practices, I think that would be a great topic to address at the end. Okay, so for the rest of this discussion, my goals are first to identify some characteristics of productive writing practices. So you hear a lot about productivity. It's a term that we use often both in academic settings and other professional settings. But what do we mean when we say that a writing practice is productive? Hopefully we'll grow your awareness of your own writing process and practices. So trying to develop that reflective thinking and develop some practices that work for you. When I talk about different ideas about productive writing, I always like to emphasize that the best practice is the practice that works for you. In order to figure out what that is, we have to be self-aware of what we're doing as writers. And so we're going to grow some of that awareness today. We're also going to talk about some strategies for setting goals, managing time, overcoming setbacks, and some other aspects that are related to productive writing. And then finally, again, I'm hoping to consider how we can use resources, including the Graduate Writing Center, strategically as you are writing. So I like to think first about a personal writing process. So you've probably learned sort of generally about the writing process. That's something that typically students are taught from elementary school on, right? We start with pre-writing activities, we do brainstorming, we might do some other things there, we generate text, we revise that text, we proofread it and edit it, and then it's finished. In reality, though, the writing process is a lot more complex. And in writing studies, we talk about how these different stages sometimes happen simultaneously, or it's recursive and you're going back to earlier stages. It's actually fairly complex. Added on to that, many graduate students find that writing techniques that have worked earlier in their careers just don't work for graduate level writing. And that's especially true for doctoral students as you start projects like the dissertation. You will generally, most people only write one dissertation. You've never written it before, and you won't write it again. And so it's sort of a unique challenge that you will face. But as you move throughout your graduate career, you'll find that you're doing more complex research and you're producing more complex writing projects, which can be a challenge. Also, you're writing in unfamiliar genres, and the expectations might not always be stated explicitly. And so when we talk about writing, the research surrounding graduate level writers shows that they don't typically receive very specific directions many times. There's sort of an idea that you're in the field and you're a professional and that you'll learn writing by osmosis. And so that can be a challenge for many graduate students. Also, the standards get higher as you move throughout your graduate career. And so as doctoral students, you're facing higher standards than you have in the past. And you also probably have less time as you take on more responsibilities in your professional and your personal lives. And then most graduate curricula don't have formal writing courses as you might have had at the undergraduate level. And so often when students get to the doctoral level, they find that the writing techniques that they've relied on in the past just aren't really suiting them anymore. So I'd like to take a few moments to think about your writing process. So if you'd like to share, you can unmute or write in the chat, but I'd like to hear what's your writing process? In other words, how do you approach writing projects? What do you feel is effective about that process or those practices? And what do you hope to change or learn about your writing process? So I'll mute myself, and if you'd like to say out loud or if you'd like to put in the chat, what is your writing process like? What's effective and what might change? If it helps to think of a specific project, you could think of something that you wrote recently. Yep, some good answers about outlining and organizing before you start in the chat. Those are really good steps to take at the beginning of the process. They're also good steps to take further in the process. You can look at what you've written and create what's called a reverse outline, where you outline every paragraph and say what the purpose of each is, and then evaluate that. Those are good practices too. Yeah, definitely important to come up with a thesis or a question before you research, and also to refine that as you go. Yeah, very good. Does anybody have a sense of something that they feel they do well? Sounds like the folks who outline feel good about that. Write the intro with the scope, method, objectives, etc. Do you start with the intro, Joel, or do you go back and write that at the end?
I actually usually write the intro first and then go back and kind of look and go from there. It just kind of helps me outline it from there. Start the research from there. So just something I got used to when I used to write history papers. So that was what we did then. So
yeah, good. Yeah, it's interesting. Some people like to start with the introduction, and some people like to end with it, like to write everything but the introduction and then go back. And whichever order you do is perfectly fine. I always like to remind people no one ever sees your drafts. So we have no idea how you're writing it in what order. No wrong answers here. Is there anything anybody hopes to improve, or something you want to learn, something that you maybe feel you don't do as effectively as you could, or something you struggle with a little bit? To be more concise, yeah. I feel like that one is it's ongoing for everybody, I feel, you know. So yes, I hear you there. That's something that I feel is really useful to get another perspective, whether it's somebody, a colleague in your field or the writing center, to say, you know, here's a shorter way to do that. Transitions and summaries, those are such good topics because they're so widely used. Transitions, I'll say we're going to talk about those in our workshop next week. Quotes in APA, yeah. Do you mean using APA to accurately quote and use or properly cite the quotations, or are you thinking like paraphrasing quotations?
A little bit of both. I was more familiar with Modern Language Association, being an English major and teaching English, college level English for 5 years. So switching gears to APA, I have to really watch myself, because I can accidentally use MLA without thinking. So I have to really concentrate on my quotes just to make sure I'm not going into MLA.
Yep. That's a good thing to evaluate too, I think, after you have some text written, so that it's not interrupting your flow when you're drafting it. You can just go back and focus on it all at once. But yes, that transition can be difficult. I have a similar experience where I primarily used MLA in Chicago. And actually in writing studies, sometimes we use APA as well, because it can be sort of a social science field. And so, yeah, I know, I hear you there.
Yeah, it's kind of like a puzzle. I just have to take out the piece of the puzzle and reinsert. So, yeah.
And there's some stylistic aspects of APA as well, like this emphasis on concision, that sort of thing too. So it's not just that citation guide, it's really stylistic. Yeah, that's great. Seeing balancing repetition when writing for an audience unfamiliar with the paper topic. Yes, that can be really difficult, but I think that's such a great point. And I see that you're thinking about your audience, which is so important. And thinking about repetition again. Yeah, grammar errors. And that's something that, you know, we can address all of these issues in the Writing Center on those one-to-one consultations, whether you're thinking about concision or whether you're thinking about something like genre. I saw summaries up there, for example, as a genre. If you're thinking about repetition, but we're really offering a perspective, a readerly perspective is what we call it. So when someone's reading your paper, to say, well, you know, as a reader, I feel like this is repetitive here, or maybe I feel like I'm missing a piece of information early on. I don't get that information until later, and that's confusing for me. And so that's one strategic way incorporate the Writing Center into your process is to use the consultants as readers, sort of beta readers for your paper or whatever it is that you might be writing. And we do talk about things like grammar and punctuation, but we also talk about those sort of big picture things like, you know, does this make sense to my audience, or am I clearly explaining my ideas? So often it's clear in our heads, but not necessarily clear on the page. So lots of these, I think, really could be addressed in those one-to-one consultations. Does anybody have ideas about writing practices that maybe you'd like to develop in some way or grow? So that might be something like, for me, I need to be really protective of my time because when things get busy, sometimes the writing is the thing to go. And so I participate in a writing group myself because then I get 3 hours of protected writing time every week. And if I didn't have that, then it would be hard for me to fit that into my schedule. What about others? Are there maybe some practices, not necessarily the words on the page, but practices that you think you'd like to learn more about or try something new? I'll suggest many things in a few minutes that you might try, but are there any things that you have in mind? And if not, I'll suggest some in a minute.
I was going to say, so the one thing I've kind of, and I know Dr. Miller's probably going to start clapping here, but looking at different lenses as far as how we look at things and stuff like that, that's really kind of gotten my my attention. And actually, some of the stuff I wrote last semester, I probably wouldn't turn in now. So it just because I didn't really feel like I looked at it from the right lens, and so starting to look at that, it kind of changes the way I would approach things. Where it may make sense to me, it wouldn't make sense to a family or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that is such a sign of growth when you say, you know, I looked at something I wrote and I see how I could develop this more or better. So yeah, I think that a practice could be thinking about it through different lenses and you know, maybe even before you start, you think about that, something like that. Yeah. Thinking about how you apply theory, thinking about how you describe it in your writing, for what audience. Yeah, I think that those are all really good. It's a sign that you're also developing self-awareness, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. Let me advance the slides. Okay, so I do, as I mentioned, I have a handout that does not seem to be going through the Zoom file share. So I would be happy to email it out afterwards. If that's okay, I could email it to Dr. Miller. But I have all the information we need here. So I'm sharing now this concept of being held back. And this is from a reading by Heather Zwicker. It's from Inside Higher Ed, really accessible article. But the theory here is that there are things that hold us back from being productive in our work, including our writing. The most surface level things are technical errors. So maybe there's some relevant skill or technique that we need that we don't have. So for example, maybe we need some additional resources. Maybe we don't know about all the different theoretical lenses. And so that's something that we need to become better writers. Or maybe you're not leaving enough time to write, or maybe you don't have the software that you need. These are things that are sort of easily fixed. Then external realities are other things that sort of hold us back. These are situations or factors that are outside of your control and require some careful planning. So some examples include health issues, life changes, if you have a heavy teaching load or a heavy workload. I think the pandemic would count as an external reality that's really challenging many of us right now. And so that might be something that you're contending with as you're trying to become a more productive writer. And then there are also psychological obstacles, and these can be really the most complex and difficult to address. And these are issues causing resistance to writing or low productivity. So that might be something like fear of success or failure. It might be imposter syndrome, but those are the sort of internal psychological obstacles you're facing. So I'm going to invite you to identify something that's holding you back and come up with a busy schedule is something that I contend with my technical error is not leaving enough time to write. I really don't. And so something that I do is block off that time, set it on my calendar. It's time that no one can schedule anything else. Are there any other examples you'd like to share of things that you feel are holding you back? And I can switch screens now actually and pull up our handout, hopefully. I'm not sure, can you see that, or is it still showing the PowerPoint? It's one of these fun Zoom tricks.
It's still showing the PowerPoint.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop share real quick and I'm gonna try to share my handout so that you can see some other possibilities. So if you've set the wrong time to write, I can only write in the morning. If it's after 3 o'clock, nothing is happening in my writing. So that could be an error. If you don't know how much time some writing tasks will take, or maybe if you are the wrong person for the job, you think you have to do everything, and asking for help is a sign of weakness, then that's one of those technical errors. If you haven't created a support and accountability mechanism, those are all things that you can fix, but you'll need to come up with a plan for overcoming it. And then again, those external realities, health problems limiting your energy, maybe the physical materials you need to work are in transition. So for example, if you're moving, or during the pandemic when we couldn't really go into offices and maybe something you needed was there. If you have to work in an environment that has lots of interruptions, or if you're in some sort of life transition and you have a new baby, or you're going through a divorce, or you have to take care of elders in your life, those are external realities that require a lot of conscious planning to move around. And then again, psychological obstacles are really difficult, but being aware of them can be helpful. And those are those sort of fear of success, fear of failure, hyperactive inner critic, those sorts of things. So any ideas about something, and I'm going to go up to technical errors so that you can see those as some easy fixes. Anything that you think affects you and holds you back from becoming a productive writer that you'd like to share. Unmute yourself or share it in the chat if you'd like.
I can share because I work full time, and I teach family consumer sciences, and I was at work late tonight because I needed to clean the kitchens. You know how that is. And then I have a son too with special needs, and he was diagnosed with a second disability this year. He's been in and out of the hospital, and so for me to get work done is such an accomplishment. And we count our blessings. We go day by day, and I really have to work and strive. And sometimes I get that cup of coffee and I just stay up late because that's when I get work done. And just finding the time and the drive to do it, and I'm thankful for weekends. So that's mine, is just trying to manage my time. And I've learned to use like planners and the calendar so I can remember meetings like this. And I turn I try to be discreet, and I'll turn my picture off of my son, or I keep my mic muted so y'all don't hear him screaming in the background. He's having fun with dad's keeping him entertained. But yeah, that's me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I can see how so much planning would go into that too, and self-motivation to stay up late and work on weekends. Yeah. Excellent.
Thank you. All right, I'll mute now.
Anyone else want to share?
I kind of have a little unique. I give it up for people that I don't work. This is what I do. So time is a little bit better for me, and I really don't know how some of y'all do this, to be honest with you. So I think one of the things I do is, even when I'm just reading and learning, trying to, go through all the journal articles and stuff, is I don't spend enough time actually reading because I'm worried about the writing aspect of it. And I worry too much about the aspect of it. I think about it all the time when I'm not studying or whatever. I'm thinking about, well, what if I wrote this, or what if I wrote that? I think I might stress it just too much, to where it doesn't actually flow naturally. It's like, it's more of a, like a robot sometimes. But I mean, it's kind of weird. It's just, I don't know, it's really weird.
Yeah, it sounds like part of it is this bullet point about maybe incorrectly estimating how much time something takes. Maybe you need to spend more time on the reading or dedicate more time to it. But also, I think that it can be a good thing to be constantly thinking about your writing. I mean, you want to have a life outside of writing. I mean, don't tell anyone I said that, but it is good to have a life outside of your writing. But I think that the fact that you're thinking about it all the time isn't a bad thing necessarily, but yes, this overthinker word I think is really interesting, right? It's good to be engaged and it's good to be thinking, but perhaps you're overthinking. And it might be useful to come up with some different drafting strategies that, for example, the free writing strategy where you just write without stopping on a topic. I'll talk about that as a strategy for a couple different things. You can turn off your computer screen and just type without looking if you find that you're trying to go back and correct too much as you go. But yeah, I think those are some things that we can definitely talk about, strategies for in a writing consultation, for example. But that's something to think about. I think that these are sort of technical errors that you're bringing up and maybe mixed in with perhaps some underlying psychological ideas about high expectations or something like that. These things are so interconnected. So yeah, I think that that's a great example. Thanks, Joel. Anybody else? In the chat. You're never satisfied, Jermaine. I know, me neither. I'm with you there. And that can be difficult if it holds you back from writing, right? So sometimes this is very common among doctoral students and faculty where you feel like you struggle with perfectionism. And so this is something I sometimes have trouble submitting the project because I want to tinker with it and I want to go through and I want to change the comma and then I want to change the comma again and then I want to reword it. And it just feels like it's never good enough to send. And so that's definitely a common struggle. It's sometimes good to get that other reader's perspective too, because sometimes someone has to tell me, just send it in. You just have to send it in. Great examples. Okay, I'm going to switch back over to my PowerPoint now. But I wanted to share that because I think that it's useful to be, again, aware of these things as we're talking about developing a writing process. Because as you can see, there are so many different things that you might need to overcome that might be holding you back. These things are always changing. As your life changes, you'll face different external realities, perhaps different psychological obstacles. But it's important to be aware of them and also to identify ways to cope with them. So some strategies for productive writing. To me, productive writing practices are reflective or metacognitive, and I'll explain that in a moment, goal-oriented, process-oriented, consistent, and sustainable. So these are all things that I think about when I'm defining what a productive writing practice is. Are there other characteristics that you think we can attach to this concept of productive writing? Any other thoughts there? So we want to make sure, again, that we're being self-aware and we're thinking not just about, we're not just writing, but we're thinking about it. And we're thinking about setting goals in our process and being consistent and sustainable. All of the strategies that I'll talk about truly work for either 1L, people who for whom English is their first language, and also people for whom English is not their first language. Typically, the strategies work. You might use them in different ways, but those strategies that I'm going to talk about today should be pretty widely applicable. Let's see. Just fill in I's. When I write so much, I automatically fill in words that you didn't put in the page. Yep. Those are things that you can find, Aubrey, when you go back and revise. And so when I'm talking today, I'm going to talk a lot about thinking about your writing, a lot about time management. I'm not going to talk very much about specific strategies for revision, but we do a lot of that in the Writing Center in workshops and in especially in those consultations when we have those one-to-one conversations. So we can definitely talk a little bit about some drafting and revision strategies, and that might get at Jermaine's question about writing as a non-native English speaker as well. Okay. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about reflection and metacognition. So again, we're talking about this because understanding your writing process will help you develop practices that work for you in this moment in your life. So things that worked before may stop working. You may need to adjust course as you go through your doctoral degree and beyond, but we're trying to be aware of it so that you can develop practices. Developing those reflective and metacognitive writing practices will help you develop writing skills. And again, the way we do this is to spend time actively thinking about writing and not just doing the writing itself. In my home field of writing studies, we spend lots of time thinking about writing, right? That's sort of the whole field. But in there, a threshold concept that we have is that writing is metacognitive. It's something you have to think about your learning processes and think about the writing in order to develop your writing skills. So some strategies to consider here. Make sure you're discussing your writing with your faculty, with your graduate colleagues, with writing consultants in the Writing Center, but actually talking about writing and getting outside of that, 8.5 by 11 page that you have is really important. It helps you think about it. So actually most of our sessions in the Writing Center aren't people actively writing, although you can do that. But it's usually people reading and discussing, right? So we're really practicing this in the Writing Center when we have graduate students come through the door. I also think it's a good idea to practice reflective writing. And so not just writing the project itself, but actually writing to help you think through it. So one way that you can do that is to free write. Again, that writing without stopping. Some people like to free write at the beginning and end of a writing session. And when you're free writing, you're not necessarily just writing, text. You're not necessarily generating text for the paper, but you may be just writing about the paper itself, identifying problems or, trying to think through blocks that you might have, things that you're not quite sure how to handle. Sometimes when people are just starting a project, they set a timer for 5 minutes and free write, and they might be writing down, I don't know what to write, I don't know what to write, I don't know what to write. And then that sort of acts as an entryway into actually generating some text for the paper. So using that strategy can be useful because you're actually thinking through what you're writing. A little too far. Any questions or any other suggestions?
Dr. Robertson, did you have something to say?
Because, and I don't know if it's but
You're kind of cutting out a little bit.
I didn't quite catch that.
Dr. Robertson, you kind of sound like a robot. I agree with you, Aubrey, on that. You're kind of cutting out in your talk there. So I'm sure because it's why you're on the road.
It's one of those Zoom hazards.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, he's gotten off. I think he'll
okay.
Get on.
Okay, hopefully he can come back and
yeah,
make the comment or ask the question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else before we move on from this metacognitive idea? Don't just write, think about your writing.
Well, and sometimes I think too, Kristen, I get writer's block.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I I'm not thinking well here. And sometimes just writing just what's off the top of my head helps me get out of that writer's block so that I'm
Yeah.
at least not forgetting what I really want to write about. Sometimes I'm just throwing words up there on a sheet of paper, and then all of a sudden when I see them, then that starts to make sense and so forth. But yes, like some of you mentioned a while ago, that you start to overthink too much, or you start to analyze your writing too much, and then before you know it, you're going, oh, I'm frustrated, and then you end up going, I can't think right now. And so you have writer's block, and many people have writer's block, even famous writers out there. So that's a common thing to have. So don't be worried about that or anything. But at the same time, I felt like the only way that would get me out of that writer's block, which I kind of had this past Wednesday in the writing group I was in, Kristen, that I thought, okay, I'm just going to throw things up here that I know I need to focus on, and then maybe it'll come to me.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think that using those writing strategies or those talking strategies I see we mentioned in the chat, talking with somebody, is so helpful. Sometimes I think people think they have to write down like a perfect draft in order, and it just doesn't work that way. If you put up some ideas you're thinking about, you can leave gaps in your writing, you can rearrange it later. No one ever sees the rough draft, and so using those strategies can be so helpful. I also find talking with people to be really useful. Again, we do a lot of that in the Writing Center. I would say also, don't forget, you don't just have to generate text by writing it, typing it, or writing it freehand. You can also record yourself talking through ideas. So if you're more of a verbal or an oral person and it helps you to verbalize things, you can absolutely just record yourself. You could do a speech to text function. There are lots of ways that you can compose. It doesn't have to just be writing. Okay. So I mentioned being goal-oriented as something that's really important. And if you remember that Zwicker piece, a lot of that had to do with, a lot of those technical issues have to do with not setting goals or writing without a plan. And so when you're writing, you might think about the goals as sort of the plan that you have, and you need both long-term and short-term goals. So for long-term goals, make sure that you're keeping track of any deadlines from your department or the graduate school and so forth as you're thinking, especially about things like your dissertation. Those deadlines tend to creep up on people. Once you have that sort of endpoint deadline, make sure that you're budgeting time for writing, revision, and unforeseen setbacks. It is, just a universal truth that something unexpected will happen. And so make sure that you're building in some cushion of time for some sort of setback. It might be personal, it might be with your research, but often we experience setbacks. So try to leave yourself some time and remember that writing takes longer than we think it will. It almost always does. And so trying to keep that in mind when you're setting those long-term goals. But to get to those, we also need to set daily goals so that when you sit down for a writing session, you have an idea of what you can accomplish, what's feasible to do in that time, and what you want to do. So these goals might be time-based. You might say, I'm going to write for 3 hours. One popular technique is called the Pomodoro technique, which is named for those tomato-shaped kitchen timers. So that's where you write for 25 minutes, take a break for 5. And then every 4 cycles, you take a longer break for 20 to 30 minutes. But I always remind people to time their breaks, because sometimes we'll walk away from the writing and then suddenly we're in the middle of a Netflix marathon. And that's what we want to avoid. So make sure you're taking breaks, but make sure you're timing the breaks. There's also the many pages method, which is something like I'll sit down and I plan to write 3 pages. Sometimes when you try to write 3 pages, you can keep going and write 5 pages. That's great. But you can have those sort of page-based goals. And you can also have task-based goals. So you might plan to write the introduction to a chapter, for example. And your methods might change every day based on what you're doing. They might change based on the task that you have at hand or what part of the writing process. But these are just some possibilities when you're thinking, what can my goal look like? These are some common ways to set small daily goals. Okay, so the goal setting system that I most often recommend is called SMART goals. If these sound familiar, you might have heard them in many different sectors. It's a really popular concept. But the idea is that if you learn to set goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely, those are goals that you're more likely to accomplish. So if you have really vague goals, it's hard to meet them. Like if you're going to say, well, I'm going to write my dissertation. Okay, that's great. You should do that for sure. But what do you need to do in order to write that dissertation? Breaking it down into specific goals helps you understand what needs to be accomplished. It's also good to have measurable goals, meaning that you have concrete criteria for measuring your progress toward the attainment of each goal you set. So how will I know when I've attained that goal? And to that end, they should be attainable, meaning the steps in the time frame should match, right? You should divide that big goal into portions that you can achieve. And usually we set them week by week in this method. They should also be realistic. And this is, we find especially in boot camp and writing groups where we're talking lots about goal setting, you know, people really have trouble figuring out what's realistic, and it's a learning process. But you want to think about how high to set the goals. So goals shouldn't be so high that you can't attain them in the available time, but they also should challenge you. And so most often people will set really high goals, not realizing that it takes a lot of time to accomplish whatever task they've set out to do. That's one of Zwicker's technical errors, not leaving enough time for the goal that you have. And so timely is the T in SMART goals. Having a time frame gives you a sense of urgency and helps you track your progress. So instead of saying, I'm going to write my dissertation, you're going to break it down into separate steps that you can measure. You're going to tie those to a timeline in a way that you can attain them, that they are realistic. And you're going to, sort of look at that timeline and make sure that it matches up to what you need, right? Because if you just have sort of an unstructured goal without a timeline, then it's not as likely that you'll be able to achieve it in a timely manner. So this is on the handout, but I'll just, you can just do this on a piece of paper, your computer, or the chat. But I'd like to hear one writing goal that you have for this month, and then the individual steps you'll need to complete that goal. So we're taking one goal and we're going to break it up into its component parts that are going to be attainable and measurable. And then we're going to tie it to a time frame. So what are you going to do each week? And you can continue this process for every day, but note, you're probably going to need to readjust them. So one example of a SMART goal to think about, just like an individual goal, instead of just saying, I'm going to write my dissertation, you might say, okay, today, or today, Thursday, I am going to write this specific section, and I'm going to draft it, right? So we can think about the stage of the writing process. Or you could say something like, I'm going to revise my references list by cross-checking each of my references to make sure that it's in the main text. And then I'm going to make sure that all of the formatting in my APA is correct, right? So those are really specific goals. Instead of just saying, I'm going to write my references page, we want to know exactly what you've done so we can check it off the list. So does anybody have an example of a writing goal for this month, something that you are hoping to accomplish?
Dr. Alexander has challenged us to transform a paper that we did in a former class to something that can be submitted for a journal entry. And so, or a proposal. So one of the things I'm doing is meeting with the Writing Center to try and see what sort of things I need to do to revise it. And so my goal is to begin making revisions on the first part of that paper.
Yeah, that's great. That's an excellent example. And I like that you have a couple separate steps. So you're going to meet with the Writing Center. So that's one part of it. You're going to determine what needs to be revised. And once you know that, you can list out everything that you need to do to revise it. You can kind of cross it off the list. That's a great example. See some other projects in the chat. Good. But do you see how breaking something into component parts that are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based could be helpful as a strategy? When I send that sheet, you'll see that there are spaces for you to write this and sort of try out developing your own SMART goal. So I would encourage you to do that when you get the handout. It also has a weekly progress report template. So again, often we need to reassess the SMART goals. In this exercise, which I got from Dr. Height, who is a professor in the College of Education, combines reflective writing with SMART goals. So you look at those SMART goals and you review the weekly goals from your schedule, and then you confirm or refute your progress. So you talk about what you did achieve. If it's applicable, think about what you didn't get to and what might need to move until next week. Think about the challenges you faced, because again, unexpected things are going to happen. What are some successes from this week, and what do you need to do to move forward? So that's also on that handout if you are interested in trying out this exercise, doing your SMART goals for a week and then reviewing them. Okay, and then remember that the goals need to be flexible, don't get discouraged, and keep writing. That's the biggest thing, because sometimes when we get discouraged, people will kind of walk away, right, from the writing, or you know, throw that article in a drawer and never open it again to be revised, something like that. That's really where I think, especially in writing something like a large project, like an article or a dissertation, that's where people tend to get in trouble, is when they get frustrated or they get stressed or they become too critical of themselves and they start avoiding it. So, you know, no judgment. Part of this is a learning process to meet these goals. Just keep on writing and keep moving forward. I also think it's important to use technology that supports your process. So I have a few suggestions here. There is an endless list of apps and websites, you know, that you can use. But I'm going to mention just a few things. For one, word processing software. So some people like Scrivener, which allows you to sort of integrate articles and to move large chunks of text easily compared to Microsoft Word. So I know some people really like that. Some people use LaTeX, probably not so much in your field. That's typically more for some of the hard sciences. Some other apps and websites. The National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity is a really useful site. We have an institutional membership for Texas Tech. And so you can sign up, and they have a series of webinars. They do 14-day writing challenges, which are accountability things where you check in with writing partners and sort of mark off your progress. I would encourage you to check that out. The website I'll put in the chat is facultydiversity.org. And again, if you sign up with your Texas Tech credentials, then you get access to all of their resources. Some of them you do have to pay for. They have a faculty success program that you would have to, that is not included in that institutional membership, but most of their resources that are applicable for doctoral students you can access. There are Pomodoro apps that will do that timer for you. There's a site called Write or Die, which has consequences for slow writing. So if you don't write quickly enough, it'll start erasing part of your text, which is something that I cannot handle, but I know that some people like. I prefer something like Written Kitten, which will send you animal pictures if you hit your word counts. So every 100 words, you get a picture of a kitten. There are also things that track how you spend time online, other things that'll block websites or apps or the internet if you need that. Lots of sort of ambient noise, white noise that might help you focus. I was at a conference, a virtual conference last week, and someone mentioned FocusMate, which is a site that pairs you with an accountability buddy virtually. And so there are lots and lots of apps and websites out there. These are just a few. Does anybody have other apps or websites or technology that supports your writing process? Okay, another one I know of that some of our writing group members really like. I think you can set your phone, and if you don't pick it up for a certain amount of time, it like donates toward planting trees in the forest. And so the whole writing group will have this app running while they're writing. And so they're able to sort of generate some trees being planted, which is interesting. Yeah, try the kitten site. I think that one's kind of fun. But that's just to say
I know it has nothing to do with writing, and there's no probably correlation whatsoever to anybody else but me. But I've seen every Seinfeld episode about 10 times each, and I can probably quote most of them. So literally, when I'm writing, I have them all saved on my DVR. I will put that on in the background right behind me, and it actually helps me concentrate more on what I'm doing. And every once in a while, I'll be writing and I'll giggle a little bit because I'll hear something. But for the most part, it actually helps me tune something out so I can concentrate on writing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yep. I mean, find the thing that works for you. I know a lot of people have playlists that work that way. I have a friend who likes to write to really dramatic movie music and soundtracks and scores. I mean, it just depends. But yes, I think that's a great point, that there are some things that, you know, might individually be useful like that, and sort of put you in the mindset as well. If you always write to Seinfeld and you hear Seinfeld, then, you know, that might be something that kind of jumpstarts your writing process. Okay, it's also really important to be consistent in your writing. So writing isn't just something that you do once in a while, it's something that you really engage with on a regular basis. So, you know, it's a good idea, if you can, to develop a daily writing practice. I know that that's hard for lots of people. You'll hear lots of different advice, like write for 15 minutes a day, or if you have some time, you know, there's just a little bit of time, try to get small tasks done. I think that that's good if you can do that. I have a friend in the English department, Dr. Cortese, who says to touch your writing project at least once a day. So even if you are just changing some of the punctuation, at least open the Word doc so that you have, you know, some contact with it and some engagement. Even if you are just writing for 15 minutes a day, remember that gradual progress still is progress, and it's really better if you get even just a little bit done, or a little, you know, some things changed, just that you stay present with it versus not doing that. Now, again, you aren't going to finish that dissertation if you only write 15 minutes a day. There is a book called Write Your Dissertation in 15 Minutes a Day, but if you actually read the book, the conclusion is that you can't just have 15 minutes a day. You might start with 15 minutes and build up, but make sure that you are writing consistently, ideally every day, but if not every day, then at least on a regular weekly schedule. Hold yourself accountable. So joining those graduate writing groups or finding friends or colleagues, you know, that can be really useful. Even if you just check in with one another once a day and say, you know, hey, I made my goal. If somebody is expecting you to check in, you're more likely to actually do something so that you can share that good news. And if you have bad news that day, if you say, you know, I just didn't make my goal today, then your accountability partner is probably going to say, you know, that's all right, you'll do better tomorrow. But having someone there can be a really powerful way to continue and to hold yourself accountable. Make sure that you schedule time for writing and everything else. So don't just expect that you'll find time for writing, that it'll just sort of happen or, you know, fall into your schedule. Again, writing is somewhat unique in that, you know, if you fall behind in it, somebody else might not notice for a while. So if you don't show up to teach your class, someone's going to notice that, right? If you don't pick up your kid from school, someone's going to notice that. But if you don't write for a day, or for 2 days, or for a week, or maybe even a month, it's possible that no one else will notice. And so you really have to hold yourself accountable and schedule time for it. So establish a routine. If you can, try to write at the same time every day, or make some sort of weekly schedule. There's an idea called the Sunday meeting from Carrie Ann Rockmore. And the idea is that once a week you sit down and you plan out everything that you have to do, right? You write down in your scheduled time blocks for your classes or your teaching and your laundry and, you know, meal prep and going to the gym, whatever. Schedule it all out and schedule your writing time in there, because if it's not in your schedule, it may not happen. And then also be protective of that writing time. So don't use that time to complete other tasks. A lot of this is takes some discipline, but it's important to keep that consistency. If you don't touch your paper for a month, it's really hard to jump back in, right? And so if you stay engaged with it, it's much more effective. And then finally, writing practices should be sustainable. We've all been in that situation where we're running up against a deadline and we really just need to get something done. Maybe you've pulled an all-nighter, maybe you are working 14-hour days toward doing this, but that's not really sustainable, right? And the truth is that you're always going to have to do some work. You're always going to have a plan to write, even when you're done with your doctoral program. You don't just stop writing because you've graduated. So developing sustainable practices that can kind of carry forward is really important. So again, we're trying to establish habits that let you continue to produce research and writing throughout your career. Okay, so we've run through all of those different productive writing ideas. So with the remaining time, let's think a little bit about any concerns that you have, any advice that you have, things that work well, and then how you can strategically use resources to facilitate your writing process. So what's the takeaway here? What do you think you're going to do now that we've talked for a while about productive writing? Any thoughts? Next steps.
I guess I'll go. I guess the one thing I just realized is that I don't actually take note of what I do well in writing necessarily, and I'm basically reinventing the wheel almost every time. So I need to start kind of keeping track of what I actually do well and apply that more consistently, I think, because
Yeah.
without that, it's yeah, like I said, I'm almost reinventing the wheel almost every time I write that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting because you know, I talk about this a lot with our writing consultants. We're often trained to seek out the errors or to seek out the ineffective parts of writing, but it's equally important to notice what's effective and what's going well so that you can replicate it. So yes, do spend some time thinking about what's effective. You know, think about what you've learned from a writing project that can be applied elsewhere, whether it's something specific about a writing strategy or a technique, or whether it's just, you know, something kind of broad, like that idea of looking for things going well, right? That's something that you can sort of train yourself to look for. So much about what we do in the Writing Center is just noticing things in writing, you know? It's really about being analytical and being engaged and looking at your writing and thinking about what's going on and how somebody will interpret it. I'm seeing lots of good ideas in the chat about scheduling time and using SMART goals. I hope that you will take some time to do those things and try them out, you know. Try some different things that I've written here. I have a list of resources on that handout that have to do with productive writing, and not every strategy will work for everybody. That's okay. You know, when I look at this advice, I do a lot of it, but not all of it works for me, and not all of it will work for every writing project, and that's okay. So I'm trying to give you lots of possibilities here to choose from. So try out some different things and see what helps you. Any other ideas about things you want to try? Or other problems? Mm-hmm. Yeah, please.
One of the things I do is I share my calendar, obviously, with our in our department, and so it makes it where most people can see our calendars, so that way they know when I'm writing and that I'm not going to schedule a meeting during that time and so forth. So that makes it really nice to, I mean, if you're working with people and you want to set a writing time, you want them to be aware when that is, then that's really a good way to make sure they don't bug you during that time, is because they see it on your calendar. So, and I agree with you that I think it's very important to hold yourself accountable. And if you can find a writing group or be a part of a writing group, I think that's really what's helped me this year a lot, and last semester as well, because they've made me accountable, and I got a lot more writing done than I ever thought I would have. But also at the same time, designating that time spot, that 3 hours where nobody bugs me, nobody's, and I mean, my phone's turned off because I get distracted by it. I even turn off my Outlook, my calendar, because I'll get distracted by all the little pings, you hear when somebody's trying to email you and so forth. So that's another thing that those things that are going to immediately get your attention, you're going to have to turn them off. Otherwise, you're going to be disrupted in your writing and so forth. And somebody mentioned a while ago that I have to have silence. I do too. I have daughters who can play music and write. I can't listen to music while I'm writing. I've got to have it completely quiet. So that helps my thought process and everything. So think about that also too. And you've got some other things that some people put in the chat that are very good ideas.
Yeah, excellent. I need to try that Outlook, turn off the notifications. That's something that gets me. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think thinking about atmosphere, thinking about the light is good. Thinking about, if you're in a space that's conducive to writing, if you are somewhere that's uncomfortable, or if you don't have access to food or water and you need to get up and move, like those are things that sometimes take people out of it, kind of out of the moment, and they get distracted. Also, if you're somebody who can't write at home, I know it's been difficult with a lot of the stay-at-home orders, and we haven't always had access to places like coffee shops or offices where we might go, but trying to find a space that is sort of dedicated to writing can be useful. Trying to eliminate other distractions in your home. I always joke that nobody ever wants to clean the toilets until it's time to start writing, and then people start wanting to do literally anything. It's called procrastinating. Is a phrase that I've heard some people use, right? So anything that can take you out of it. So if you're somebody who can't write at home and you can go somewhere else, then try to do that, or try to plan your schedule so that you can spend some time. But find the physical and the environmental conditions also that allow you to write. So this is a great conversation about lighting in this chat. Yeah. I'm not kidding, Joel. That's really something that people prefer to do before they write. I know.
That has never entered my mind before writing. So
nope, I hear that a lot in writing workshops. Yep, they're like, I want to do the dishes, I want to clean the house. That's really a phenomenon. I think that's when you know that you're really being like avoidant in your writing, right? Like you are really avoiding it. And so we don't want that. We don't want the feeling that you'd rather be doing anything but writing. But sometimes, especially if you haven't been writing for a while, or you have a lot of that anxiety surrounding it, you do tend to avoid. And so a lot of these strategies are meant to help you not do that. I completely agree with this need for transparency about accountability. I think that that's something that is really useful as well. Yeah. Good. I'll also, again, I know I'm sort of making a lot of plugs for the Writing Center, but if you feel that you're stuck at a certain point, or if you feel anxious about it, also there's sort of an affective component to writing consultations, right? Like you're talking to somebody about your writing, you're getting another perspective. It's somebody who's genuinely interested in what you're talking about and genuinely wants to help. So if you are feeling like you are trying to avoid it, or you're feeling like you're anxious about it, or you feel stuck in some way, it's also a good idea to schedule an appointment. And sometimes I'll mention people feel a little bit anxious about going to the Writing Center, or feel a little bit concerned about sharing their writing. But it's really a very judgment-free place. And so if you're feeling like hesitant to talk to somebody about your writing, there are no red pens in the Writing Center. We don't grab the paper and write all over it. It's really a conversation, and we're really focusing on whatever questions you might have. Now, we'll give you our honest opinion. We'll give you some suggestions and some feedback, but it's a very collegial place. So I wanted to mention that as well. The most common comments we get are the people feel much better after they've talked to somebody, and also that they wish they had come in sooner. So I would really encourage you to take advantage, especially of the writing consultations. as sort of something that will help you throughout the whole process. Been enjoying this chat. I feel like everyone's been sharing such good ideas and thoughts.
I love that. Kristen, you did a wonderful job. Thank you so much. If everybody would give her a virtual applause here and say thank you so much. We appreciate your time and everything. These are all great. And even the little ideas, little apps you talked about just a moment ago, I had no idea about any of those. So I thought those were really cute. And so we're just really appreciative and everything. And thank you so much for letting everyone know they can contact you all anytime. And using my Texas slang there, y'all. Contact you and let you know that if they have any struggles or those kinds of things too. So I want you to contact them and let them know if you're struggling or having a hard time with your writing. I guarantee you they're wonderful and very easy to talk to. And I even felt like at times I'm a pretty good writer, but I even learned some new tips and tricks I was not even aware of. So I was really appreciative of everything they did. There's Kristen's email address in the chat and everything. So thank you so much, Kristen. We appreciate it. Anybody have any further questions of Kristen or anything?
All right. Well, I hope I can work with you in the Writing Center soon.
Yay.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Kristen. Bye,
Right.
everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye.